Hi, everybody. My name is Tanveer Ali. I guess my title is graphics and data reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. I sort of made up that position a few years ago. I just came up with it at my old job. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff, and now I'm doing live election results. I did this last week. Obviously, it's not live right now. So I can't show you the real-time part of what I did. But I don't want to talk through some of the editorial choices I made. Not so much the tech side of it, but though I assume you're all pretty interested in how some of this was built. And I will say 90% of it was D3 and just basic JavaScript. The data is housed on Amazon's S3 servers, which are pretty reliable, and especially on election night when you're worried if your computer can take it. It was great. Worked pretty flawlessly. So I'm going to go through a little bit about some of the challenges I had in coming up with some of the ideas I did. And I want to talk about some of the stuff that other people did. And I want, if you have questions, just raise your hand. Feel free to interrupt. And I hope to hear from you about some of the stuff you saw on election night and after. Because one of the big challenges I had with election night is a lot of people do it. There's data vises all over the place, though actually not all over the place, because there's some challenges to getting this data. I should talk about how our election coverage is powered. So Illinois has 102 counties and 3 cities that have their own election authority. And on election night, everyone wants all that data at once. No organization, newspaper or otherwise, can do it except for the Associated Press. The Associated Press is this company that a lot of newspapers are subscribers to. They give them content and help support stuff when the basic staff can't do it. So we paid this the Associated Press for an API key, which gave us access to all Illinois, well, not all, statewide election results and election results in congressional races, the state legislature, everything that's not really, really local. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this kind of thing, but that's how it comes in. So I get an access to a test file a few weeks before, and I build everything around these IDs and figure out where the races go and how it's going to be computed. They ran 3 or 4 fake election tests every week, so I made sure to be at my computer every time that happened and prayed that on election night I didn't screw up somehow, which I didn't. So we get this, the Tribune gets this, the New York Times get this. We all have the same data set that we work with. And so what do we do to make it different? Because the Sun-Times is big in Illinois, but in the grand scheme of the most important midterm elections of our lifetime, we're one of many organizations doing this. So we really doubled down on this idea that to focus on Illinois and all the races that exist here. So this is the main page to our election results. What we did here was, you see that map there. It's the most important race that I'm sure everyone was caring about, Pritzker versus Rauner, which ended up being called within 20 minutes of the polls being closed. So it wasn't that interesting. But we put that front and center as an editorial choice, and we made sure to include other big races. This was actually supposed to be the biggest race, the Attorney General race. And you see the map changes as this goes. This was just as much of a blowout as the governor's race was. And then all the other statewide races, a few really key congressional races that I didn't color code red to blue because it was a choice. I'm the only person working on this. I had to make sure it was able to be presented, and then I decided I can't, add more D3 to this. So I put it out like this, showing where the district is and showing key sites so people will have an idea of what this is. So that's the main page, but we also got a little more granular, and I think one thing I don't see on election night is being on the same page and getting some context about past results. So I made sure to include results from the last governor's race, which the Democrats only won one county there. And I also compared to the 2016 presidential race. So people get a sense real time how things are going and how this compares to things in the past. One other thing you might notice is there's this thing called precincts reporting, which is actually a big deal right now with the recount in Florida, because all precincts have reported, but how there are more votes coming in. This is just the easiest way to convey how much of the vote has come in. And actually AP hasn't counted all the Illinois votes yet. But I'm often thinking, where are the votes coming from still? So I also created this tab right here. On election night, it was a little different, obviously, but they turn purple when there's no more votes coming in from any county. There's a couple counties actually still left. I will update it on November 20th when the final vote count comes in. And then I did this little thing that updated real time every minute as the vote was coming in. You could see there was very little tension that night. But I basically hit the AP servers every minute, and they just recorded the vote just based on that. So we put all this effort in the governor's page and the big statewide races where you can map out counties and show geography that people understand. But this was not our biggest race that people cared about. Our biggest visualization that actually, in terms of page views, was this, which is a very simple JavaScript counter that I put together last minute, because I feel like people don't really care about state house, but they do, because no one else does this kind of thing. And actually there's a few really close races. There's one that's separated by 2 votes, so that hasn't been counted. So moral of the story from election night was, as a local newspaper, the focus should not be on making sure you could keep up with everyone else, but filling the hole that no one else is filling. If I get to do this again, where there are state house races, I will focus on more on the local races. And actually there is I started working on the next election, which is in February in Chicago. So I could get really granular local and do some cool stuff with that. So that was election night. It started at 7 p.m., ended around 1 a.m. I slept for a few hours, and I started up again because everyone's demanding analysis. Tell me why things happened the way they did. And I prepped some stuff for the next day. I just plugged in some numbers. This one, there might be a paywall issue here. Sorry for the huge ads, they pay our bills. So. All right, so this one, what I did was each of those circles is one of the 102 counties in Illinois. And I mapped it over using the vote count and mapping it over a demographic thing so people could look at it and figure out, what explains the vote. And I also included 5 different races. This is, I was planning to do the Attorney General race because I thought it was going to be interesting, but as you can see here, it wasn't that much different than the actual governor's race. But when you compare, here's this year's governor's race, and here's 4 years ago, you could really tell the difference in what happened. Everything moved up for 4 years ago towards the red, towards Republicans. Everything moved down this year towards blue. And then I mapped it over, the axis is, the other axis is based on census data and other election data. So we look at turnout. You could see where things have, some of the comparisons are really obvious and some of them aren't. I just put everything I could demographically in here, and my goal was to allow the readers to discover things for themselves, mostly because of the time crunch. I don't have the time to actually analyze this. Let's let the readers figure this out. Another thing I did is this is the one thing I'm going to show you that's not in D3. This is in Leaflet, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a freer version of Google Maps. I mapped about half of Illinois' 10,000 precincts. And I would have done all of them, but the state doesn't have the shape files, the coordinates in computer form. So it's just a matter of, I'm not going to take the time to actually map 10,000 things. But I focused on vote spread here and wanted people to know what the turnout was, because I thought those two were very telling of how things were. I wish I could have compared it to 2014, but outside of Chicago, unfortunately, some of the geographies for precincts are different, and I didn't want to go into analyzing and cutting part shapes, and I didn't really have the time for it. But maybe next time I will. And then, let's see, the last thing, what is this one? Actually, this is the same thing. We also have a newspaper. Which one is that one? This one. So I built a Chicago-centric map, and don't think that even if you live in Chicago and even if the city's like 90% Democratic vote, don't think your vote doesn't matter, because after doing this analysis, I found out that if Chicagoans voted this way, the way they did this time, that they in 2014, even though the rest of the state was lost by Quinn, the Democrat, he would have still won if Chicagoans voted the way they did this time. So these maps were actually built in QGIS. I don't know how many of you are familiar with GIS software. Step back a bit. Shape files are these things where these files that are embedded with geographic data, usually latitude and longitude or other ways to denote where you are on the Earth. QGIS is a free version of ArcGIS that allows you to manipulate data, which I didn't do. But I spatially joined the vote count with the geographies, and then I spit it out as an SVG, and I made it a little prettier in Illustrator. So that's really all this is. So I did two versions. Well, I compared 2018 to 2014 in terms of the vote spread, and then here's the turnout. Green means more people voted in that precinct, so you could really see, without the numbers actually being involved, how much of a difference this year was compared to 4 years ago. Any questions before I go into what cool things other people did and I wish I came up with?
Were there actually precincts? I can't really tell the colors.
Well, it looks a little better. And
Sure.
Yeah.
But were they actually like down below 10%? Is that what?
No, I just made the scale that way so people can see it. I think the lowest was like 30.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The colors are a little weird here, but yeah. And that's a good point, because I did spot check a lot of it, but when you're joining in however you join it, whether it's like on SQL or like GIS, you might not have the bandwidth to check all 2,069 Chicago precincts. So I did spot check some of them. One of them, I asked the election coordinator, why does this precinct have more than 100% turnout? And he's like, that number is wrong. So I graded out. Some people did not do that, by the way. So yeah, a lot of this is pre-processed, but I try to make sure the data is good. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you have the precincts from 4 years ago, and like what flipped, and like, do you know, like what last time, just was either low turnout or
I have it.
Turnout, do you have like anything like showing?
I have it on my computer.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it,
Yeah, and that could have been definitely a decision I could have made in terms of the color scheme. Just say more Rauner or more Pritzker, like just two-tone instead of this gradient. And that's often a decision.
Well, I was just more thinking it'd be interesting to see if the reason that people voted this way, like you're saying 4 years ago, when they would have won, is that just a consequence of people turning out, or is it just actually changing, you know?
Oh yeah. So I do have the numbers. I can't quote them exactly, but I know in this area, Rauner's vote went down and Pritzker's went way up. So it was a matter of turnout, definitely. Definitely on the north side, and then on the south and west sides, it was like steady. So that would have been enough right there, just to help him. Though I mean, Pritzker won like enormously. So like, I guess it counted. So, yeah. So I don't know. Like, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. A lot of it was based on priorities and making sure I had a product ready for Tuesday night. Next time I would probably add more like mouse over type action, or maybe not. I mean, I don't have the data that shows what people actually like how people interacted with the maps. I just have a hunch to go on, though I know Google Analytics will let you like add JavaScript code that says this person hovered over this county if I really wanted to get really granular about it. I only have my hunches to go on in terms of what worked and what didn't. Though we had one of our highest traffic nights in like 3 years, so that was cool. I want to show some of the other stuff that people did on election night, because both bigger places and our peers. The one map I didn't get around to, because WBZ beat me to it, was this map. So the closest vote in Chicago, I don't know how many of you are actually from Chicago, and I don't know how this question got on the ballot. I have no idea who put it there, and it doesn't really mean anything, is if you believe in banning plastic straws within the city of Chicago, it's not binding at all. It was like 52% yes and 48% no. So, and I had my eye on this, but it was like, in the grand scheme of governor versus fake straw ban, this had to go. So this map, purple is mostly no and green is mostly yes. So, and I don't know, again, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the geography of Chicago, but whenever you look at something demographic, whether it's health, crime, or whatever, somehow it always looks like a version of this map, where the west and south side are very similar, and like the Latino areas and the north side are very similar too. So it's interesting seeing different data being visualized and looking very similar every time. This one, I thought this was cool and very simple. So there were 3 states that have like really high profile close races. And they did a version, the New York Times did a version of what I was doing with the tracker with the governor's race. So this is way more interesting, showing how the vote is converging into the recount zone. Looks like Georgia's not going to get there, but you see how throughout the every hour the Florida race got in more and more into recount zone, and then Arizona went in the opposite direction, just like exploding towards the blue side. Politico did something pretty similar to what I did, though for all 50 states. They did the standard red-blue map. They gave you 2 options, which county was more Republican or Democrat, but also they gave the gradation thing, which is like always a judgment call. I mean, I like going into gradation just because like there's some nuance in it, but I understand how people can't really tell the difference. Is that 40% or 30%? My rule is just give them a snapshot of what's going on, and if they're interested, they'll explore it further by, the tooltips right here. And they did something very similar to the demographic thing I did. They didn't really focus on vote spreads here, but they also did some math in terms of deciding statistically whether this mattered or not, which I might learn statistics next time and actually do this, but we'll see. The BBC did the basic stuff that everyone else did nationally, but also did this really cool map of how the night unfolded. People really love how the night unfolded, even though in the grand scheme of things, it does not matter. Because they're actually still counting votes everywhere. because it's like a sporting event and you want to see it real time. And then they give other really good analysis of how Republican candidates won and by how much, Democrats won and by how much, looking at female representatives, turnout. These things aren't loading for some reason, but oh, there they are. And I think these are very simple explanation analysis that I think people can understand just by looking at it, which is really important when you're doing a forward-facing, front-facing look at visualization. This one came across today, and I would click on it if I didn't have the paywall issue. But this is a very clear map of turnout across the country by county, not by precinct, because precincts are very hard to do, especially in that short of a time. And you could really tell where the yellow places are where like the vote count exploded. What else? I think that's all of them. Oh, and then there's this thing. I don't know. Are you guys familiar with the needle? I don't know. It gives me anxiety sometimes, but it's a cool way to engage with election night. Like, and there's statistics involved with this and math I don't understand, but it fulfills the need of catching people's attention and keeping it there on a night where everyone might have the same information that you do. Does anyone else know of anything that they saw really cool Tuesday night? Either, well, not just elections, but just in terms of live graphics, like real time, the data's coming in, I want to see it now. Yeah.
Well, I was watching 538. They kind of had similar issues with the needle where their model swung quite a bit, which did the exact same like anxiety-inducing process of the needle, which also probably what keeps eyes on it.
Right.
Because you're like, oh my god, no, wait, no. So you're doing that. But they did an interesting way of doing it that was a little different than the needle.
I can probably speak for all journalists and say 364 days a year, our goal is to give insight and tell people about the world, but election night is all about keeping people on your site because everyone has the same information. So yeah, I mean, it was weird working because I'm usually clicking around and seeing who has the best thing, but I couldn't really see other people's live stuff on election night this time, but thanks. They do like forecast real time, which is interesting. Anyone else? In the sports world too. Like, I mean, I think ESPN has that thing where like probability of winning based on every single play, which is fun to watch, I think. Any questions about like my processes, what I like the programming behind it? Yeah.
So the New York Times has a cartogram now of the election results by like population.
Yeah.
Did you think about doing the same thing for like the Illinois state results for the counties? Right?
I have thought about it. So the problem, I would say there's the problem with that. Oh, so I had this also where I showed the margin of lead, but though I played a little bit with Cook County because the circle would have been enormous if I let it really be proportional. I would say the problem with that is people don't recognize where a certain county is the way people know the US map. So if you look in the bottom left corner, just by that big state over there, right inside, you could probably gather it's Nevada. But you can't do that for like all but 4 or 5 of these counties, and they're all on the northwest side. So, but that's a good challenge to take on. Like, how do you figure out proportionality in a geography that people aren't as familiar with? Yeah.
You mentioned precincts were hard. Is it strictly because of the lack of electronic versions of the data, or is there some other difficulty going on there?
First off, it's bandwidth. I'm the only one working on this, so there are some trade-offs. But also, yes, I've seen the PDFs that some of the counties have sent to the state, and they're literally drawn on like napkins. Like, they are all composed of census blocks, but there are thousands of census blocks per state, and figuring out exactly which census block is in which precinct is time consuming, and I would love to do it sometime. I think the New York Times did that nationwide map of all the precincts based on 2016 precincts, and that took them 2 years to finally do. And the thing is, a lot of those precincts have changed this time around, so they can't use the same files as last time. Yeah.
With that figure, you said you did that entirely in Leaf Green.
Yes.
How did you, so I've worked with Leaflet a little, and working with like a GeoJSON or something like that is really simple, but how do you accomplish a really complex multi-county object like that using just Leaf3?
So it starts out the same way as Leaflet. I process it through QGIS, and they have this plugin where you could export it as an SVG, and then I make it look a lot better in Illustrator, and I make sure I give an ID to every county in the right place in the right way, and I just like, make a join of the data. Anything else? Yeah.
Of all the things you showed of what other places did, or maybe something you showed, is there something you looked at after the election act and you thought, oh, this is something I should have done?
It's hard to think of it that way because the Illinois elections weren't that interesting this time. But February, I mentioned February earlier, that's going to be really insane because I don't know who's going to be mayor in a few months. There's like, I think some of you are running for mayor right now. But there's the challenge of that in that one because it's not a binary red versus blue. So there's some, I pulled up, so this is what I did for the primaries. It's a little less polished. But no one knows what that blue color means. Like I had to come up with like 6 different colors for all the Democratic candidates. So that's gonna be a challenge, like being able to like show people, like I don't want people's eyes going back and forth between the legend and the thing. So, but that didn't answer your question. That's a good question, and I haven't had time to breathe, but I mean, there was really cool stuff up there. I plan to do, hopefully, there's 50 ward races, aldermen. I hope to do precinct maps for all 50 of them, which can get really granular, but people love stuff that doesn't exist anywhere else. So, yeah, sorry, I didn't really answer your question, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
How much oversight does like the editorial board have of your graphic images, and does that influence like how you present it? So you were saying that there's that one map that basically seems to split along racial and ethnic boundary lines in Chicago. Is that something where I've already read it in both the Tribune and the Sun-Times, people discussing the relative success chance that mayoral candidates have based on whether they'll get the Latino vote or the black vote? Is there, do you feel like that will guide your presentation at all for that race? The South and West side and which candidate?
First of all, I know that's going to be what it turns on. Like it's going to be all like in Chicago. It's not a Democrat versus Republican. Unfortunately, it has a lot to do with race. No, I mean like, I guess I picked those colors up there because they don't mean anything, and I don't want to associate a color with a certain person. But a little bit about how the news staff or Chicago Sun-Times works. You mentioned editorial board, which is a different opinion oriented, and that's like telling people what they think. I'm more on the news side where it's all about facts and like letting the information just dictate what I do. Every decision that I made right here was agnostic of what I thought was going to happen. It was just based on either red versus blue, people understand that, or finding a neutral way and getting ahead of the fact that I don't want people to think I was biased automatically in these decisions. And this is just about color on a map. But I mean, thought like this goes into every single one of those colors, unfortunately, but it took a lot of time to think about. Yeah. You had a question? No. Cool. Ready for the show and tell part? Or- yeah. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.